What is the best method of monitoring and measuring the rehabilitation of our clients? Strength versus rate of force development. Why does it matter, and how do we assess it? We explore these questions and more today, and we're joined by two leaders in the space. Dr. Claire Minshull is a rehabilitation and conditioning specialist, researcher and visiting professor at Leeds Beckett University in the UK. Lachlan Wilmot is the co-founder of Athletes Authority and brings a wealth of experience from elite sport and high-performance environments. So let's get into it. I think you're going to love today's episode. I'm Sarah Yule, and this is Physio Discussed. Welcome, Claire, and welcome, Lachlan. Thank you both for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to sink our teeth into this topic. I think it's a really important topic for the world of physios, osteos, chiros, all of our listeners.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, delighted.
So we'll dive straight into it. My first question is, what's the best method for monitoring and measuring the rehab of our clients?
I don't think there's a single answer to that. I think for me, whenever I'm asked that type of question, it comes back to what is it that you're trying to change? And that is some of the basic, I suppose, principles of strength and conditioning, exercise training, rehabilitation. What indices of performance or what metrics are you trying to change? And then you can start to look for those tools or those metrics that you want to apply to judge progress. So I don't think there's a single way of being able to assess that. So it's multifactorial, isn't it? It's going to be, if you're thinking about physical performance, we can easily measure strength, or sometimes we can easily measure strength, and how accurately. That's another question. You got like kind of strength, and you got some of the later kind of stage stuff, maybe power and stuff like that. Earlier on, maybe you're looking at range of motion, and then there's also like the psychological component as well, isn't it? How is that athlete feeling? The kind of kinesiophobia, that type of thing. So I think for me, the start point is establishing that hierarchy of importance. What type of things do you want to change, or what are all the things that you want to change, and kind of list them in a put them in a list and then put them in order. Like, what are you going to focus on kind of first and foremost, then kind of using that periodization principle really, and then what you're going to move on to. Then start to think about what are the tools that we've got in order to be able to measure progress and or success.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's spot on. Exactly what Claire said. It's such a huge open, clamshell of discussion that you could have, so to speak. But for me, it's the most consistent. At the end of the day, you can work in a very high budgeted, high performance program. You can have Humax, Cybex testing. You can have kinematic, Vicon systems set up, and that's fantastic. But if that's what we do as the gold standard, then 99% of people have no hope if that's the case, and we know that's not the case, because we can have some fantastic outcomes from some very basic things, and thanks to people like Vold that now have subscription-like model technology. If anything, it's almost the other way. People probably have too much access to technology, and they don't actually know what they're looking at, and they get confused, and they feel that they have to keep up with the Joneses and do this and that. And I think, as Claire kind of alluded to, let's just start at the beginning, and at the end of the day, it's principles over anything. And if I'm taking rehab and being an S&C coach, I certainly dabble in, but don't lead that early stage. But it's okay. Well, like if it's range of motion, that's the overarching principle. Range of motion. How we measure that, you can do it with a video, an eyesight, a goniometer, or you can do a 3D motion capture and everything if you want. We're still measuring the same thing. And I think that underpins everything we do. Claire mentioned power, and power is unbelievable, but you could do a simple hop, a 3 hop, and requires nothing. Or, you can get them on a Humac and just get them unleashing, and you can get every data point. You can put them on a 3D capture camera and a force plate, measuring every angle, and you're still getting power, but, you're probably giving yourself more opportunity and more things to delve into. And I've seen some of the greatest rehabs done with very little equipment, but just a very good practitioner that knows what they're looking at. And I think there's probably a slight bit of, and I know a lot of physios probably can relate to this, that I think we probably need to start a lot of your ventures without the technology to train your eyes a lot more before you get the technology. I think coaches and physios that start with tech day one, they probably get a bit lazy, and I probably sound old saying that, but you get so used to looking at data points that get spat out. You're looking at iPads. You're not watching the person jump. You're letting it tell you things, and that's not to say that it's wrong. It's just probably to say that if you were ever in a field environment where you don't have the tech and stuff like that, you probably don't have the coach's eye to be able to make decisions on the fly, as well as someone that potentially has done a lot more rehab without all the tech. So I've probably rambled there a bit, but I think at the end of the day, it's the principles of what you want to chase, as Claire said, and then depending on the environment you're in, I don't think there's a better or worse way. It's what's consistent, repeatable, what can you afford? Because if you can only do one HUMAC test, maybe it's not the best option. You're probably better to go back to some grassroots with things that you can repeat 6 or 7 times throughout a rehab length.
If I could just pick up on a point there, because I think it's so current right now, which is on, and I agree violently with you, in that we've got so many devices available right now, and lots more now in the affordable range for individual clinicians in clinics. And I think there's also maybe a sense of, I need this device because I need these numbers. And, my teaching has kind of now opened up into the field of assessment and dynamometry and measurement science, because I think it's now ready to be received. Because just because you have a number, it doesn't mean anything. You need to know how that number was generated. What's the measurement area associated with that? How often can you take that? Are you testing in exactly the same way each and every time? And if you're not, then that is redundant. That test is redundant. So we shouldn't be chasing the tech. We should be rolling it back to basic principles and thinking about, what is it that I really need to change with this person, with these groups of individuals, with my patient populations? And then how can I best achieve that in terms of assessment, which may or may not include dynamometry, tens, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of kit, because everything that we do needs to be understood and properly delivered. So as a clinician, and to that point about being able to use your eyes and inherently your clinical judgment and your experience, that's invaluable. And that is that will be better than an objective test done poorly. So I think just to say that don't chase the tech because it's needed by we will feel the pressure to have it. By all means, and I'm a great advocate to achieve objective measures if they're done well, and let's learn how to use the tools, because they can be fantastic in terms of giving you data. But that shouldn't be the thing. It should be, what is it that we want to change? How can we seek to evaluate that? What experience do I have? What time am I able to invest to learn how to use these tools, techniques, etc.? And again, back to affordability. So just a little bit of extra, I guess, kind of some points on that,
Objective data can still be wrong.
I think those are fantastic points, and it probably goes all the way back to your original opening line, Claire, which was about intentionality. I think we care about what we measure and how much we're measuring, but are we actually measuring exactly what we care about? And just on that, I'm curious, because I've noticed we have all of this capacity to measure with VALD and do all of the strength tests. Do you feel like because we have that ability, do you think we're measuring at the right timeframes after actually allowing a rehab program to have a proper effect before we measure again?
So the critical thing that we really, really want to get, that is almost impossible to get, is pre-injury data and when that person was flying. So we've established a baseline. Okay, and we've got a marker that we can aim to get back to or exceed, and that's always going to exist. So that means the earlier we can test, the better. If we're and that's the caveat being quality data capture, standardized test, done well, and we know what we're assessing. So the earliest point that we can obtain quality data enables then some sort of comparison. And I'm not saying it's the thing that we should be aiming for, but it gives just you start to build that picture. And as Lachlan was saying before, the number of tests then you can obtain, you start to build a profile and an understanding and I suppose, a picture of how that individual started out and is progressing. So I don't, a single test in a moment of time, even if you're doing like a interlimb symmetry test, ratio data doesn't really tell us anything because we lose sight of absolute performance and performance change. So a single test in one moment of time might give us a little bit of information that might feed in a little bit to our clinical decision-making, rehab pathways, whether you're returning to play or not. But we need more than a single assessment, and we need to start think about assessing over time. And there's many ways you can do that commensurate with your rehabilitation programming at the start, prior to surgery, if there is a surgery, as soon as you see somebody following, if they're injured, if they're in pain, or if it's inappropriate to load heavily the naively injured tissue, then you need to rethink that a little bit. Maybe you can get a measure of the non-injured affected side, etc. Again, coming back to that profile of that person and the time frame, I guess, of rehab and recovery.
And from a performance standpoint, and apply it to rehab as well, that there's 2.5 reasons why you test. 1, to influence your program. 2, to store data in your back pocket because someday they're going to get injured and you're going to use it. So in our facility, we have both performance and rehab, and all of our performance athletes, as good as we claim we are, they'll eventually get something. We hope it's little, but they'll eventually get something. And the history of data that we have to be able to look back on to guide their return to play and performance is second to none. And we really value that. As Claire said, it's so hard. You usually get them when they're injured. You wish you could go back and get it. And so we kind of, go back in the future and make sure we do collect it. And the half reason is if they've got a combine test or their sport demands something. And sometimes you're just handcuffed and you've got to get them good at that lift because that's what they're going to be judged on. But the caveat to all of that is if you can't repeat it, then it comes back to the gold standard. You're like, if I'm running a team and I have all these amazing technology options that I can use and we can do all these tests, but it doesn't really influence my program. Plus, I can't even repeat the thing because it took me 2 days worth to try and get through all 50 athletes in these tests. Well, I can't repeat it. So it's like, well, there's really like very, very few reasons why I would do a test that I can't repeat. And I think that's very similar to the rehab space. The tests you're picking, with the exception of some range of motion ones and sort of clearance stuff, you kind of want this tracked over time because you want to be able to establish that your program is influencing this outcome. And we used it for entry, exit criteria, whatever you want to refer to it as. And then you test it again, it's closer and closer. And then, yes, you can layer in some later stage tests as you go. But as I said, apart from a couple of early stage range of motion things that I might tick off, very few tests will I ever only test once. You've got to have the capacity to do it multiple times. And I think that guides what tests you use because you can't use 27 because you can't repeat 27. Yeah, when you have these type of filters, I feel like you ultimately get handcuffed. It's the same as when you're told, this athlete can train twice a week for 40 minutes. Well, guess what? My choice of options is now handcuffed. And that happens more often than not. And it's the same in the rehab space. You've only got a finite amount of tests or time or whatever it might be. So the best practitioners get the best bang for your buck options. And they don't convolute everything with 1,000 different things that they test once or twice. And it sounds cool, but doesn't really apply very well.
I think that's a really, really important point there. You just said that the best practitioner will give you the best bang for your buck. And that's something I'm really passionate about, trying to help clinicians, rehab professionals understand and tool them with that knowledge. Because, as you said before, if there's a gold standard that involves tens, $100,000 of pounds or dollars worth of a kit, then you haven't got, everybody doesn't have that ability. But if you understand, for example, how to develop a repeatable, reliable test of a particular element of performance, that you understand the level of measurement error, and measuring an individual is very different to measuring a group of people. So we need even higher levels of measurement precision. If you understand all of that and you can do that, then you can generate your own tests within your own clinic using your own facilities, rather than strive for something that's never going to be achievable. And that is, the value of that is tremendous, because everybody sits in different settings. And it's to have that knowledge and those skills, then to develop something that's meaningful for your setting.
I've always liked the saying, to the beginner, there are many options, to the master, there are few. And it fits very perfectly in our world, because, the older you get, the more programs you do, the more you realise you go back to the same stuff.
Fantastic points. I feel like my saying on that is more is not always more, and it's the art of subtraction that we have to learn, isn't it? What do we remove to distill it into something really potent?
Especially with social media and everything, I think there's more than enough out there. Dear God, there's too much out there. And people jump, like I thought I jumped around when I was young. A personal trainer, went to a different conference every weekend, and you learn something new and you change everything. That's just a part of growing up. But now it's like every day there's a whole new method or concept that gets launched out there, and people are just swamped in what to do. So I think it's more important than ever.
Absolutely. Well, I suppose on that, and just tying off this question, but what are both of your thoughts on the best piece of equipment for S&C in a physio clinic?
Space, turf. I think it's going to be an annoying answer from me, but I think
describe athlete's authority.
Yeah, well, look, and that's not a great description, because we're very privileged and very lucky to have a lot of tech and a lot of space. And I say this all the time, that we were a performance facility first turned rehab, which means we already had a lot of space and a lot of equipment. So many rehab spaces are clinics turned more performance orientated rehab. So they're usually in smaller spaces, so they can't just add stuff. We were the other way around. We already had the size. So we just had to find spaces for plinths. But it's if I was in a rehab space and I had to find technology, so to speak, I'll try and separate these. But first and foremost, I think having a space or an environment that you can do athletic-based testing, where it might be a 3-hop for distance. These type of things I would much prefer space over any piece of tech. So these type of things are far more in line with what I would do. If I had to pick one piece of tech if I had no money constraints, probably something like an opto jump, but that is ridiculously expensive. But probably in this day and age, I'd probably be looking at something like a subscription model force plate. I think that's probably my number one. So they're pretty inexpensive these days. Obviously, Vold are probably the most well known for their whole suite, and again, it's an easy suite to go with, from a force frame and like Nord board. These things have been pretty commonly used, but I think a subscription modeled force plate would probably be my number one if I was forced to make a decision.
So
you're on your desert island, you've got valve.
Yeah.
Imagine
that.
Claire, what are you taking into your island?
As long as a power rack and a barbell as well.
Well, that's my answer, right? My answer is, so I teach a lot of physios, and they're just kind of, and rehab professionals just kind of getting into this. What do I need? You need resistance. You need kit to generate an overload that's greater than that individual is accustomed to. And whatever that looks like, it can look really flashy, and you can spend loads on kind of gym-based kits, and there's loads of different add-ons now that you can get with, kind of make it look even fancier. But the basics is, it needs to be heavy enough to challenge the index that you want to change. So strength, we know we need to push really, really, really heavy just for a few repetitions, and to create that, certainly for the lower limb, can be quite challenging. We need some significant mass to do that. So some resistance kit is really important. And then I think, again, where I sit is, can we introduce some of these principles that we're looking at when that athlete is less impaired, less in pain, or the tissue is more resilient? Can we look at some of those principles earlier on? So if we've got somebody who is load compromised, does that mean we can't train strength with them? Well, no, it doesn't immediately. Let's think about that as a problem to solve. What can we do? Can we adapt exercise, etc.? But if we're talking about kit, thinking like blood flow restriction kit, it's not for everybody, but for the right patient, it can be a real, pardon the pun, leg up to get into doing some resistance-based exercise at a much lower load that can instill some strength adaptation and hypertrophic changes much earlier on in the rehab pathway than if we didn't have that. And that's just one option that involves kit. We can do it in different ways. Yeah, so that's, just a couple of things from me. Resistance, definitely number one. And then there's some adjuncts that we could maybe use to accelerate some of these outcomes, or do some of this stuff earlier on where individuals are load compromised. So that could include things like blood flow restriction.
I think probably you bring up a good point. I think for anyone out there that either runs a clinic now or is looking to set something up, understand what your framework and system is first, and that will dictate what you get. As an example, we certainly pride ourselves on, if an athlete comes in injured, sore, pain, we will overload them somehow, somewhere, which means things like a leg extension, a hamstring curl machine, a leg press, pendulum squat, belt squat, all these things that are almost bodybuilding-like, we prioritize, because we know the amount of times that we can't do a lot of stuff with an athlete in season. They've just got to, I hate saying it, but it's tick the box. Sometimes you do. You just got to keep some sort of stimulus in them. And machines are great. So many people have these things against me, but they're brilliant. They isolate, they control, they overload, everything you want to do in a compromised athlete. I think if understanding your rehab process, looking at someone else and what they have and what's shiny and what's new, if it doesn't actually align with how you rehab, then you're going to hit a wall pretty quickly. So understand, what do you prioritize in your rehab process and when, and make sure you've got it, because you don't want to be sending athletes or any type of patients that you're working with, even general pops, down the road to do stuff that you kind of should be doing with them at your facility.
Fantastic points. And I'm actually going to use the repeated concept of overloading and underloading into the next question, which may be now a very leading question. But where do you think we go wrong with S&C in our rehab?
I've got an issue with that because I never say anybody's doing anything wrong unless they're hurting somebody. I don't ever want to be I suppose tarnished with being critical, because it's incredibly difficult to work with humans. I'm kind of one, and I know I'm difficult, and I'm actually rehabilitating at the moment. So, my team is maybe a little bit exasperated, but so not only is it really difficult to work with individuals, then you in this type of setting, you've got to know what's the best way physiologically changing indices of performance, strength, rate force development, power, what else? Tissue compliance, blah, all of these different things. So we need to know the best way to design exercise to do that, and know the dose response. Then those individuals are going to be in some level of discomfort or have clinical restrictions. So then you need to go, can I still deliver this and solve that equation? And then you've got to go, that's an individual, can I get them to buy in? Now, if you're working with athletes, usually it's a little bit easier than general populations, but not all the time. So in terms of wrong, I think there's just those individuals may have not had the right type of training, or have that level of understanding, or there's a gap in knowledge that we can help to redeem, to fill, commensurate with their own setting. And if there's anything that I know that can help people's rehabilitation practice, then it's absolutely my pleasure and blessing to be able to aid that. So I think there's ways in which we can improve, and I can improve, and but in terms of wrong, and that's not to pick on you for the question, but it's often said within this arena and within loads on social media, and it grates on me a little bit because it's a phenomenally difficult job.
Yeah, I think, as you said,
opportunity to improve then.
yeah, sometimes wrong does have the context that they're doing it on purpose, but you're right, it's very contextual, and I'll always, anything I've done, do, or say is always, and typically from the context of a team sport environment. It is a different environment to, say, your Olympic Institute one-on-one environments, or your general population clinic environments and things like that. But if I had to put it on the spear type of thing, I think the biggest misconception is probably a bit too harsh, but the biggest thing I see a lot of rehab go maybe a little bit too slow and blocked is people have this assumption that everything happens one step at a time, i.e. we return range, we should get pain-free, we then we load with range, and this type of almost just absolute beautiful unicorn type setup that never happens. And I think because of that, and in a team environment where, a lot of people are very, very happy to say these days, timelines are out the window. It's all about entry and exit criteria. And I'm all for that. But when you've got a head coach asking what game are they returning, guess what? Your timeline is straight back in there. It doesn't matter. You can't just be like, oh, well, we'll see if they get there quickly, or, we'll just see how they go each phase. You can't do that. You've got to tell them what, and you may be able to pad it out, and you'll still treat them with each phase and hopefully speed them up. But timelines are a real thing. They exist. And whether they're an athlete that has a coach asking or they're asking, they want to know when they're back. And that's where a lot of the stuff that I've done in the rehab space is, okay, well, it's still painful in this range, so we can chase heavier loads in this movement and this range, but we'll also chase range of motion with no load in this range. And then we'll try and put some ISOs, or we might use some complex work or BFR and in this range with this. And there's always a handful of things that need to be done before you technically load everything. But there's a lot that you can do when someone's still in pain and still doesn't have great range that is actually going to accelerate them at the back end once it returns. And I think the ability to work around pain a little bit more with good loading is probably missed a lot. People probably feel like I can't load anything until this is pain-free. And I think with the push of tendons and the popularity of trying to return people with tendon pain and how we can load that is hopefully shifting that a little bit. I think a lot of people are getting far more comfortable to accept a little bit of pain and good load and stuff like that. And even in the calf space, you mentioned, Claire, about stimulus. I think every week it goes up by one body weight or something that you need to pump into the calf to make it protected. It's just getting almost out of reach for most people these days. But that's a perfect example. So many people now talking up to 8 times, 9 times body weight on a bloody Smith machine, like in a seated position that you got to tolerate. Like, that's a lot of weight. These type of things, I think, are just are probably the more advanced side of it, that I think potentially people that have worked in environments that don't need to get an athlete back on a day ready to perform, that often they probably haven't been forced to try and load outside the norm. And I think that's probably what's becoming more popular now, even in your just typical clinical settings. I think people are starting to understand that, hang on, load is good when it's appropriately done. And we know that we can't accelerate it at the end. We have to have started doing something leading into that. And that's a very overarching sort of thing, I know, but that's probably the thing that I see is probably the bigger gap at the moment, that people can probably load a lot of ranges, angles, joints, muscles earlier in a rehab space than potentially they do.
I agree entirely. And it's what I teach. The fundamentals of pretty much every course that I teach is all about this. Can you solve the equation? Can you change the range? And we've got evidence that suggests or clearly shows that, isometric, for example, doing isometric training. Now, this isn't isometric 60-second holds. This is high load, go for maximal contraction at a particular joint angle will give you a strength adaptation at that joint angle. Now, if you do it at long muscle lengths, you might actually get a transfer across to shorter muscle lengths as well. So, there's loads of different ways. And if you understand a little bit the human physiology, some of the literature in this space, then you've got a multitude, maybe 5 different options without buying any kit to influence, for example, strength adaptation. And if you think about injuries, when injuries happen, we're rather than looking to perhaps recoup strength, we're looking to attenuate loss, certainly in that early phase. So if after all of the adaptations that you've thought of, you still can't do it, you can still train the opposite side. The cross-education effect is so powerful, and that means strength training one side for the benefit of the other that is not strength training. It sounds, if you never heard it before, it sounds very weird, very profound, but human body is amazing. We've known about this since something like 1894. Well, not me personally, because I'll be doing something else.
Did you give away your age then?
I'll be selling a face cream or some beauty products or something. But in healthy populations, it can generate a strength adaptation. In those injured populations, particularly the early phase, it can attenuate loss. And we've done studies in this space. And, just for a little bit of extra time, no extra money, a heavy load resistance training program on the non-affected side can attenuate the loss on the affected side, which again gives you ability to perhaps go a little quicker or have a better outcome at the end of that time point, because you've got as far or as long or as much change to make in that time frame. And even in non-athletic situations where you've got this, I need my athlete back on this date, in, like, for example, NHS, National Health Service practice in this country, you still have a time frame. You might only see somebody like 2 or 3 times. What's the biggest bang for your buck that you can get in those sessions? How can you can space them out? If you've got the luxury of doing that, you might only get to see them in a 6-week block. What changes can you make? What losses can you attenuate? So yeah, the point about thinking about the environment as equation, and maybe not going like you were saying linearly. We need to eliminate pain. Now you think about, I do a lot of work. My passion now is OA, osteoarthritis, particularly with the knee. Those individuals are in pain no matter what you're going to do with them, right? So if you're going to wait for them to become pain-free, you're going to have a pretty long wait. And they probably won't be very responsive when you start with them. So, you need to think about some of these challenges. And there's, I guess, as well, a fear of when you think about patients, individuals who are in pain or who have injuries, there is an inherent fear about, I don't want to make them worse. So I understand completely where it comes from. Do no harm, don't want to get them worse. And particularly with older populations as well. But in actual fact, if you think about this as a physiologic problem to solve, how can we, for example, reinstate strength? Well, it's high load, kind of low repetitions, ideally for an optimal prescription. But essentially, if they're doing nothing, any amount of load to start with is going to challenge that. So we do need to start to load these populations. Swimming's not really going to do it. Certainly if you look at Belinda Beck's amazing work in the Lift More trial and series, beyond that, you're thinking about osteopenia, osteoporosis, what's going to solve or help remedy the kind of bone mineral density changes. Again, it's not low load. So we've got a fear. We don't want to load these people because they're fragile. But actually, if you look at it from a physiologic perspective, we need to load that tissue to cause it to adapt. So how can I look at that situation and solve that equation such that it's clinically appropriate to do, but still I've got a chance to get some of these important stimuli in, so the high load. It's if you look at it from that perspective, then it's pretty powerful.
I feel like there's 2 things that people probably don't give enough credit for because they don't see it early on. It's only until the later stage of rehab that you can appreciate it. Is one, really good pre-surgery training, to be able to go under the knife with very little swelling, good strength, good movement. You speak to any surgeon and they open up someone that's been training leading into it. It's like a dream. That and then loading early because it's not like you necessarily, like if you get anterior knee pain in an ACL rehab, it's not like this eliminates it magically. It's not like it magically makes that first 3 months easy. But what it does do is it sets you up for the next block where you've already established this loading. We've just said you can't just throw 100 kilos on someone's back out of nowhere, but you can if they've been building up load for all this time, and you don't actually get the monies back until after. So I've seen and heard a lot of people say, "Oh, I did this, tried this, but I didn't really think it didn't really accelerate the rehab." Well, it doesn't accelerate the rehab. It's not like they suddenly go quicker. You still have to go through the same issues. You still get faced with random things that pop up. It's not like a magic fix. But just time and time again, I see in that back end, obviously, depending on the rehab, we use an ACL. It's probably the easiest one to extrapolate out over a longer time. But that 4, 5, 6 month mark is where the money starts to come back, because you're like, holy crap, like we're in this time where a lot of people are reintroducing stuff, and we can actually really push someone. And it's a great feeling, and you get them back again, not necessarily super quicker, but in a far better environment. They can actually return to performance, and it's not just return pain-free, which there's a fair difference. And I think that's where you make your money. So anyone listening, don't be shy because you're like, oh, it hasn't magically sped up the first 2 phases. In my experience, you still suffer the same things. You still get random bouts of pain. They still get every now and then something just swells, and you're like, why the hell did it swell? Like, these things happen. But I feel like it breeds a far better, robust individual once they get into the harder stuff, if they've been doing this type of loading earlier.
I think those are fantastic points. So it's starting with the end in mind. And Claire, I think building onto your point, there's certainly what I'm hearing is the relevance to consider that physiological and anatomical knowledge in what tissue we're loading, and how that feeds into the pain and performance picture, how chondral surfaces, how bone loads, how tendon loads, and how that might change our adaptations to the programming as we go.
I think, if you think about the issues that you're faced with that would challenge your loading full stop. And if there's a clear clinical reason, absolutely, I'm not saying kind of ignore all your training and your clinical reasoning, but if there's a way in which you can, joints love load, joints like loading. Like, you take away a load, your tissues adapt in the same way that you would load them, except in the negative way. So it becomes proportionately more important as we age to introduce, if we're not already doing it, some sort of resistance training, some sort of heavy training, because our lives are becoming more and more sedentary. So we're not getting it in everyday life. And even if you carry a shopping home, we want that to be easy, not to be your farmer's carry of the day, right? So what is it that's challenging your thoughts about loading, and then how can you solve that? And then clearly, if you're doing a tendinopathy rehab, it might be slightly different in terms of exercise selection than that who's maybe a runner versus an older person who wants to be able to walk on unstable ground with OA with their dog. The exercise selections will be different, commensurate with the individual and their baseline status, and with the the tissue that you're looking to engage and load. But the principles remain the same. So I say everybody is an athlete. Let's treat everybody with the same level of knowledge that we have about athletic elite performance to that general population. The principles are the same. It's just the way in which we deliver them. And if you think about yourself, how do you train yourself? Do you go to the gym, right? So if you go to the gym and do you strength train, how do you approach that? Now, if you go back into your clinic or your rehab environment, do you switch that? And if you do, why? Why do you change? Why, if you know there's a better way to instill strength adaptation or rapidity of muscle force production, if you know there's a better way to do it, why are you almost withholding that from your patient? And I say that it's a little bit provocative, but if you take a step back from the thing that causes the fear and the hesitancy and look at that objectively without emotion. Is there a way we can work around that to do what I know is best? That's the empowerment, and that's what's going to be the start to improve maybe those touch points, the input-output equation with you, your patient, and the patient with those exercises now.
Yeah, our old head of rehab, Justin Richardson, used to always say a great Warren Buffett quote, which is that the best way to make money is to first not lose money. And it is very appropriate to rehab. The best way to get strong, powerful, progress is, first of all, don't lose it. So whatever you can do, maintain whatever they've got at the time when they start, just maintain to start. That's the first advice. Make sure they don't go backwards.
Fantastic advice from you both. I like it. Moving into the sort of the strength versus rate of force development, why does it matter and how do we assess it? Claire, I know you've done a fantastic post on it as well that I was reading the other day too. So I'll if you're happy to answer.
Sure. I think so. Rate of force development refers to the ability for us to produce force quickly. And if we're looking at assessing that through some of the amazing kit that Lackey's got, what we'd look at is the force time curve. So it's like a force production over time and then removal of force. And it's the gradient of that force time curve. It's often used interchangeably with muscle power. These rate of force, RFD and muscle power, same thing. They're not actually the same thing, because muscle power, if you think about how you assess muscle power, it's usually with, if we're thinking about a very simple test of power, a broad jump. Okay, so you could have very poor power session 1, session 2, but in session 2 you can go further because you've lost 20 pounds in weight. Okay, so the thing is, we're looking to change the contractile properties of the musculature. And then again, coming back to basic physiology, that will translate, as long as you don't put on weight, into better power performance if we're measuring it in that way. So the way in which we want to, and the other thing to say, rate of force development is not just something that's important for athletic populations. It is super important in sprint speed, in vertical jump height, in rapid changes of direction. Of course, it absolutely is. But it's not only there. If you think about general populations and you think about injury incidence and you think about time course of injury incidence, it takes less than half a second to fall over, right? So we need rapidity of muscle force production. If you're standing up out of a chair and you trip, that older person who trips over their handbag tortoise partner, I don't know, whatever's there, you need a fast acceleration of that lower limb to help prevent the fall, but also then accommodate their mass as they plant the foot, which again is rapid muscle contraction. So it's first to say it's really, really important in all populations, and there's data that show deficits and loss in OA knees, in patellofemoral pain, as well as ACL injured and rehabilitated populations. Maybe it's proportionally more important. But the way in which we, and Lucky probably can say some really great points on this, how you specifically train for that, you need a different approach to it. So you do something new with somebody, they'll get a multitude of adaptations, but thereafter, you need to start to get really specific if you want to change strength, you want to change rate of force development, the contractile properties of the musculature. The key thing, and there are different ways we can focus on this. If you want to go really granular, we can chop up that force time curve and think about the early phase, the first 100 milliseconds. And yes, we are talking in very small time frames. But if I told you that it takes less than half a second, maybe less than a third of a second to fall, then these small time frames are really, really important. So we can focus on that early phase and then latterly the late phase, and we can get into that if you want to. But the key difference between training strength and training rate of force development is the intent to be explosive. And that is the critical thing. Now, you can play around with mass and load and resistance and exercise type, but there has to be that explosive intent to really focus on a maximal speed of muscle activation, which is different to, if you think about strength training and strength-based training, you just need to lift the thing off the floor or push push the thing, and there's no real kind of time parameter that we're evoking here. The key thing, and indeed when you assess rate of force development as well, if you kind of get into that, it's the as fast as you can, and the emphasis is placed on the speed of contraction. So they are different. Strength and rate of force development are different. Both are important in many populations, and all populations actually. And the way to distinguish is strength is maximal force, rate of force development is rapidity of force of production.
Yeah, I've got to
waffled on a bit there. You take
great answer.
I agree with all. I have a small gripe with RFD as a whole, just because I think it's this Occam's razor of the fact that it is amazing, but it's also the most sensitive and hardest thing to test. To actually put someone, it doesn't matter what you're doing. Let's take an isometric mid-thigh pull on force plates, which again, 90% of physios don't use grip straps. So that's another recommendation. If you're doing an isometric mid-thigh pull and you don't have a grip straps on, then you're just testing someone's grip strength. So always wear straps. Next part is to teach someone how to contract at the right time with the right intent to be able to measure accurate RFD is very tough. And during a rehab process isn't probably the best time to teach someone. So this is where you've got to qualify probably is a better word, your individual you're working with and what's going to be the bang for their buck. Because RFD is very important. It's just getting an accurate measurement is the tough part. Me personally, I'm a massive lover of impulse, which just to throw another word at everyone. But when working with athletes, you do there's this. You want to get them more forceful, but you want to get them to do it quicker. And then they get more forceful, they get slower. And then we'll get them a little bit quick with doing it, and then their force drops a little bit. It's just this ebb and flow. That is the entire life of a strength conditioning coach. Robbing Peter to pay Paul and trying to give it back and trying to find that growth. And impulse is the best way to think about it, of that area under the curve where we've actually made an entire change where you don't want someone super good at RFD but have very low max force. Same as you don't want someone really good with max force but then takes 4 hours to get there. Now, obviously, positionally, it's different. You can certainly, it is weighted. If you're working in rugby, it's a big prop forward. It doesn't matter if it takes them half an hour to get there. As long as they can get there, that's the key thing. Obviously, there's still arguments to say that it's important, but impulse for me describes the relationship of both of these actually improving, or at least one remaining and the other one getting better. Because it means that we're actually chasing both. And the way you do that is, I don't want to say art form, but it is. It's Claire said it right. Everyone's human. So if we even completely remove ourselves from a rehab space, you're working with a very healthy, high-end athlete. Same sport, same background, same ethnicity. They respond differently. It's magic. Everyone is very different. So you've got to have a lot of methods in the back to work out things, and that's why our industry is flooded with all these different methods that. Like, people aren't wrong. Like, people don't advertise this because they haven't gotten anyone better. Maybe there's one or two, but ultimately, like, everything's worked for someone somehow. It just depends how it's been applied and what their physiological response has been at that time. Their loading, what sport they're playing, but the fine adjustment of trying to get someone stronger. Then you're kind of like, well, you're strong enough. Now let's try and apply more force at a quicker rate. But then we start to look at contact time and say, well, you spend 4 hours on the ground to do this. We need to get contact time quicker. But then if we go too quick with contact time, you're not putting enough force into the ground. And there's a lot of different methods to trick the body into doing that and adjusting. But this is the nature of a return to performance. And I think if you're not having these discussions, then again, you're probably doing a return to play, not return to performance, because this is the echelon of discussion, I think, at that end stage rehab that good rehab physios, as they get more experience, want to start to have the discussions about, start to work out, okay, well, how do we improve their ability to apply force, but also now how do we do it at a greater rate? And this comes back to what's the best tech? What should I have in my facility? Well, if that's what you value, then what are you going to use? Are we now looking at, say, a gym aware unit where you can measure the velocity of different movements? Is this where you're getting contact mats or OptiJump, where you're measuring contact time of plyometric options, and whether or not you do need to load them up with a jump to slow down their contact time, but in turn put more force into the ground to then remove that and speed them up again. And it is a 4-day discussion on how you improve RFD, impulse, and max force. But it's probably the biggest takeaway I can say is that, one, they're all very important, and then the interrelationship of them is very important to decide what you prioritize in a lot of your high-speed movements and your jump selection, whether you load it, whether you don't load it, what type of rep ranges you want to use, and how you want to track even the descent of velocity. Are you actually worrying about the load, or are you just tracking how many reps above 1.1 meters a second? And once it drops, that's the set done. Like this is where we start to chase that higher end. And as Claire mentioned, like the funny thing is that this type of stuff's the most important for, I will, again, without offending, probably say the most basic of populations, where it's just an older person who is starting to degrade. You don't, you think high-end elite $1 million athlete with this type of stuff, but it's as important for the other age group, because as Claire said, like when they fall hard. And the only way to stop yourself from falling is a rapid contraction of a muscle, a huge rate of force development to be able to stop you. And there's plenty of studies coming out, and plenty of EPs or exercise physiologists and physios that are working in the space that are chasing power. And it might be as simple as seated leg extension done at a higher rate, but at least it's starting to blend that gap of, well, actually, this power training per se is not the peak. This power training is actually, sometimes the foundation of just human movement and making sure everyone's doing it. It just, at the elite athlete level, you're probably putting the magnifying glass on all the results a little bit closer. But yeah, it's if you're a physio and you're not having the discussions, I think that's something that is certainly an area for development. Yeah,
I think there's I suppose, a really good illustration of how granular it can get and how important these things are when you've got the time, capacity, resources, and you're dealing with those really high-profile athletes. And I concur with everything that Lackey said. I think if I put myself in a clinician's shoes who might be feeling somewhat overwhelmed by this, I'd just like to roll it back and say there is relevance in this, and don't worry about the volume of information that's just been imparted on you. The way in which, just because, and true, absolutely true, like in terms of measuring rate of force development, I'd say it's a futile exercise unless you're going to really practice and become experts at it and have the right type of equipment. I've written several measurement science papers on rate of force development. It's an inherently variable index, and that's due to you, it's due to your kit, and it's due to the individual being able to perform explosively, repeatedly, and habitually. But just because you might not be able to measure it, it doesn't mean you shouldn't necessarily train it. And the best way, again, illustrated really nicely, it does not have to be highly complex moves, potentiation complexes with X, Y, and Z, and 70% of this and blah. Think about strength as the fuel tank, the maximal force that individual is able to generate. Then think about the ability to express that quickly. So if you move, once you've got somebody strong, then you could almost do exactly the same exercise, lower the weight to maybe something like 50% of what they were doing, 70% of what they're doing, just to make this simple, and do it explosively. And explosively is the key, right? It's often called explosive strength in the literature as well, rate of force development, because it's been explosive. And you can do it isometrically. You can do it in machines. You can do it, kind of body weight stuff. You can do it in very complex ways, but it doesn't have to be complex. So we're now talking about poweropenia in the literature versus sarcopenia, and power maybe having more or greater influence on quality of life, all-cause mortality, disease, like strength has. So I'm not sure we're quite there yet, but it's certainly important. And if you're going to integrate it into your practice, I strongly encourage you to do, just think about the movements, the exercise prescriptions that you're doing for strength, and just drop the road a little bit. As long as it's safe to do it explosively. And it can be, that's your starting point. It doesn't have to involve all the really important things that we were talking about before when you're dealing with high-level athletes. And clearly there's a really, really strong remit for all of this. And there's maybe a lot of money at stake as well. But if we're saying it's really important for general populations, that might be just a nice way to start out.
100%. And to be honest, to that point, I'd even go further and say you don't actually need to be that strong. I think the concept of people needing to be really strong to do it is probably sometimes holds people back, because we know, greater strength usually indicates greater coordination. They're better at it, usually get more out of it. But if you're a physio standing there trying to do that and not go, oh, well, are they strong enough? Don't overthink it. If as I said, if we go back to that leg extension example, if they've got enough plates that you can reduce it by a few plates and they can do it comfortably at speed and they look like they can control it, then that's a good start. Like, don't overthink, oh, they're not strong enough yet and keep delaying. No doubt the stronger someone is, the better outcomes you can usually have with velocity work. But it's certainly not a door in my mind that just because they're not super strong, they can't start some things at velocity.
I think there's some fantastic clinical gems and some really tangible takeaways from both of you there. So thank you very much. And a huge thank you to, I suppose, helping us explore all things S&C and rehab and performance, and hopefully navigate it more confidently in the clinic, and hopefully consider ways that we can optimize what we do with our patients. So thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for having us.
It was great to chat. Went quick.
Time flies when you're having fun.